you can allow people's imaginations to do some of the heavy lifting, which is a good thing, because then it means that they become more invested in that world because it becomes a real place to them. There was so much that I could have left, that I could have put into Noughts and Crosses, but it didn't serve the story, so it got left out. And I think that's incredibly important, because you don't want to bog people down with the minutiae. You don't have to. I wanted Albion to be, obviously Albion is Britain, and I wanted Albion to be very, very similar to our world, apart from very kind of subtle differences. Obviously, it's going to have more of a sort of African continent feel to some of the buildings and the colors used and so forth. I mean, I was thinking more countries on the from Western Africa, that kind of influence, which I think actually the TV series did really well in incorporating those. But I kind of within the story, I wanted it to be a like Britain, but not quite Britain, if you see what I mean. And I think with world building, you can have those worlds that are vastly, vastly different, and you can have the worlds that are just almost the same as your own world, except for one or two or a few subtle changes. And I went for the latter, the things that the majority had and did not notice, that the minority always will notice. I used the troubles in Northern Ireland, and especially when there was more of a mainland campaign in the 80s, when I was working in the city. I used apartheid South Africa. I used the situation with the Basque separatists in Spain. It was kind of looking at all those conflicts, the civil rights movement in America, obviously. Um, it's kind of looking both at home and abroad, and looking at those conflicts, and that thing of how people view themselves, because one person's freedom fighter is another person's terrorist, and how do you differentiate, and how do people view themselves as opposed to how others view them. And again, it was playing with that. That's why it was so important to me to have the two points of view in Noughts and Crosses. So you have Callum and Seffi with alternate chapters, and both telling the story from their own point of view, because their points, I think their points of view, for me, were the interesting thing, because obviously Callum's going to see the world very differently to how Seffi initially sees it. And she's been brought up in privilege, and never having to work or fight for anything, and Callum most certainly has not, and his family used to work for Seffi's family, so that's how they kind of met in the first place. And again, to just give it that air of kind of realness to it, the sort of the sort of verisimilitude, kind of, I wanted it to read as something real, as a real world, and that was so important to me. So it was important to me to try and get that right. I think even if you're building a world that's completely different to ours, you don't build in a vacuum. You're either drawing on things that are still from this world, or it might be from imagination, but that, where does that what stemmed that in the first place? And so you're it's kind of establishing those building blocks to create your own world. Oh, it's crucial. It really is. I think um, it's about creating new terms, new ways of speaking, maybe. But it was very important for me to create my own derogatory terms for Noughts and Crosses. I didn't want to use anything that we currently use, because my world is 15 degrees away from the real world. I didn't have to go into a whole new vocabulary and a whole new terms of reference, etc. It was just kind of playing on what we already have, and having a slight shift in some of the ways that people express themselves, in some of the derogatory names for people, in some of the names for people, etc. The beauty of doing it in a book is that then when you're reading it, the reader is then painting a picture for themselves, and they create the world, and what they have in mind might be different to what you have in mind as the author, but it doesn't make it any less valid. But obviously when it's a TV series or it's a theatre play, then you're seeing that world. And I think again with the TV series, I know they spent a long time on the costumes and the productions, at the production values, and how the houses were going to look, and having a sort of West African kind of, maybe a Nigerian or a Benin or a Ghanaian kind of aesthetic to some of the decor, etc., was incredibly important. But I didn't need to provide that, because people could read it and fill in that for themselves, which is the beauty of doing it as a novel. So so I kind of so there's an awful lot. I think you can allow people's imaginations to do some of the heavy lifting, which is a good thing, because then it means that they become more invested in that world, because it becomes a real place to them. I think what it is treating children and young adults as people with intellect, and not talking down to them, but saying, yes, this is a new world, but I know you're going to get it, and I know you're going to. And in fact, it was for some of the comments I've had over the years about my Noughts Crosses series, it's like young adults absolutely get it. And even if you're creating a new world, you're having a conversation with them, and you're trusting that they will get it. There was so much that I could have put into Noughts Crosses, but it didn't serve the story, so it got left out. And I think that's incredibly important, because you don't want to bog people down with the minutiae. You don't have to. It came very close, actually, and there were some things they came up with that I thought, I wish I'd used that. It was things like, there's a famous statue in Senegal, and I can't remember what it's called, but it's basically, and it's huge, and it's basically of a man with his arm around a woman, and they're holding a child, and they used a similar thing for the aesthetic of a statue overlooking the Thames. That was kind of, obviously CGI'd in and so forth, but it looked amazing. And it's that sort of thing I wish I would have made reference to, just a slight reference to. They were going to meet at a certain place, which was going to be of this kind of a cross man and a woman or whatever in a very striking pose. And it's that sort of thing. But I just kind of think that's why I love the TV series so much, because it had things that were very close to my own vision. It had things that I hadn't even thought of, that I thought, I wish I had done that. And I loved what they did with it. I feel I was very, very lucky in that the TV series, I felt was it wasn't the same as a book, but it shouldn't have been the same as a book. And I kind of felt like they had him going to military school, and they aged them up, and they had him going to military school rather than secondary school. And I felt it absolutely worked. So I was very happy with the TV series.